parable of the laborers. He says this, he says, for the kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out early in the morning to hire laborers for his vineyard. Okay, let's stop here. So when it says that, when Jesus is talking through a parable, he's saying this is the kingdom of heaven. This is what it's like. Really, if you want to simplify that, it's like this is who God is like. This is what God is like. When it says this is what the kingdom of heaven is like, it's saying this is the personality of God, or this is kind of who God is. So if we're trying to discover who God is, and Scripture shows us that, this parable and the parables that Jesus uses are just saying, hey, if you want to know somebody, this is how we know them. So this is how the Scripture's just defining who God is. So picture this. It's a cold morning. It's about 5:30 a.m. The dust is settling on the center of town. You see the fog kind of rolling in and kind of rolling out, and in this certain town, all of these workers come to the center because they know when they come to the center of town that there's going to be someone that day who's going to hire them to work in their vineyards. And so you can picture the scene. Like if we were in Jesus' day at this time, we would understand this so clearly because this happened all the time. It doesn't happen so much anymore here, but it did in Jesus' day. And so you have the center of town and all these workers standing there waiting, and they're going to wait there that day because they have to work, and they're waiting to make money so that they can go home and feed their family. And so here we have this. So the kingdom of heaven is like a landowner, and he went out early in the morning to hire laborers for his vineyard. Now look at verse 2. So he says, now when he had agreed with the laborers for a denarius a day, he sent them into his vineyard. So you have to catch this. It's 6 a.m. in the morning. That's what time they would start work. How many of you guys start work at 6 a.m.? Any of you? A couple of people? Early birds. So 6 a.m. And these guys got up early. They're waiting. And all of a sudden they're like, yes, we got hired. And the master sends them into the vineyard and says, hey, I'm going to pay you a full day's wage if you go and work a full day. Great, that's a great deal. And so they head off and they go into the vineyard. Now listen as it goes on, it says this in verse 3. And he went out about the third hour. So it's talking about the master, and he goes out in about the third hour, which is about 9 a.m. So you have about 3 hours later. And listen to what it says. So they got out third hour and they saw others standing idle in the marketplace. So he saw them waiting around. Now remember, they weren't there. They weren't the early birds. They weren't, we got an early guy here. They weren't early at 6 a.m. They were there at 9 a.m. And they probably thought, well, maybe we'll get a job, maybe we won't. Well, the master of the vineyard needed more workers, and so he said, fine, it's 9 a.m., I'm going to hire you. And listen to what it says. So he did the same thing. And he said to them, you also go into the vineyard, and whatever is right I will give you. So they went. So you have these guys got there at 6 a.m., the early birds. You guys got there, guys got a little bit late, 9 a.m., and they head out. And then in verse 5, it says this, and again, he went out about the 6th and the 9th hour and did likewise. This is interesting. Now, the 6th hour was noon. So these guys were really late to the game, right? I mean, you're talking noon. That's half the day is already over. And yet, the master comes in, sees them standing around and says, hey, you know what? I still need some help. I'll pay you whatever is right. Head out to the vineyard and go to work. And then again, he comes back at 3 p.m. Now, that's almost the end of the day. 3 more hours of sunlight to work in. And he still hires more people. And he sends them out. Listen, it goes on. Verse 6. And about the 11th hour, which is 5 p.m., he went out and found others standing idle and said to them, why have you been standing here idle all day? And they said to him, because no one has hired us. And he said to them, you also go into the vineyard, and whatever is right you will receive. Excuse me. So you have this picture, right? You have all of these different workers in the vineyard showing up at different times. Now just imagine you're a vineyard worker, and you got there at 6 a.m., and you have been working all day long. and you got up early, you wanted to work hard, and you wanted to make money, and so you get there early, and you're sitting there, and and then all of a sudden these guys start showing up all throughout the day. What are you going to say to them, right? Oh, yeah, hey guys, we've been here all morning. Where have you been? Right, and you know how, so the 6 a.m. guys are standing over here, and they're kind of, they got their group. The 9 a.m. guys got their group. You got the 12 noon guys got their group, and the 3 p.m. guys have their group. And then the 5 p.m. guys who are like the latecomers are like, we only got an hour of work. And everybody's looking at them going, yeah, nice guys, show up and do an hour of work. Now you could see the workplace tension going on. Right? Can't you see it now? And you could see them kind of working again, and you have these people who are judging each other, and there's all this stuff going on. Okay, and that's what Jesus is getting at here. And then look at what happens in verse 8. Listen. It says, so when evening had come, which was the end of the workday, which is 6 p.m., the owner of the vineyard said to the steward, he said, call the laborers and give them their wages, beginning with the last to the first. Okay? So the steward goes and lines them up. 5 p.m. guy, 3 p.m. guy, 12 noon guy, 9 a.m. guy, and 6 a.m. guy. And he's going to start paying them what they're due. Verse 9. And when those came who were hired about the 11th hour, they each received a denarius, which is a day's wage. Okay, you catch it? The tension? Or wait a minute, if that guy's only been here an hour and he got a day's wage, what do I get? If I'm the 6 a.m. guy and I see that the guy who's been there an hour, I'm thinking, man, that boss, he's a good boss. Oh my gosh, does that mean for every hour I get a day's wage? And I'm already spending the money in my head, right? And you could see everybody thinking through, oh my goodness, I can't believe these guys who worked there an hour get a full day's wage. What are we going to get? Listen, as it goes on, it says this, but when the first came, they supposed that they would receive more, but they likewise received each a denarius, or a day's wage. And then they said this, and when they had received it, they complained against the landowner. Now think about this for a minute. They've been working in the fields all day. They agreed to work to get paid for what they worked for. And the landowner paid them, and they only got a day's wage each. So the guy that worked an hour got a day's wage. The guy that worked 12 hours got a day's wage. The guy that worked 5 hours, they all got a day's wage. There was no difference. There was no difference. And so they were complaining, they were angry, and they were saying, hey, come on, are you kidding me? Do you ever feel like you've been ripped off? You ever feel like you deserved more than you got? Do you ever thought that maybe you got dealt the wrong deck of cards? That's what these guys were feeling. So they complained against the landowner, saying, these last men have only worked 1 hour, and you made them equal to us who have borne the burden and the heat of the day. Right? So they're whining, oh my gosh, we've been out here all day long. We've been working so hard, and it's been so hot, and it's not fair. And you could hear they're whining about it. They're crying about it. Verse 13, but he answered one of them and said, friend, am I doing you no wrong? Did you not agree with me for a denarius, or for a day's wage? Didn't you agree when we were sitting in the town center and I said, come work for me and I'll give you a day's wage? Didn't we agree on this? Verse 14, so take what is yours and go your way. I wish to give this last man the same as to you. So the landowner, he's like, look guys, if I want to give this last guy a bunch of gifts because he only worked an hour and I'm giving you the same. You can't whine about that because we agreed to this. Now, this is where it gets me. This is where this verse really challenges me, and I want you to listen to what it says. Look at verse 15. Remember, this is what God's like. He says this, "Is it not lawful for me to do what I wish with my own things?" Is it not lawful for me to do what I wish with my own things? In other words, God is God, and he's going to do what he wants with his own things. Do you catch what? Is it not law? Does God have every right to do what he wants? That's not a rhetorical question. Yes, he has every right to do what he wants. And then it says this, or is your eye evil because I am good? So then he takes it a step further and he says, or is your eye evil? And that's kind of this idea. An evil eye is a Hebrew idiom, which it's like kick the bucket. So when we say kick the bucket, we mean, someone dies, they kick the bucket. Well, when they say evil eye, an evil eye is a selfish eye. It's like someone who has an evil eye is selfish and all about themselves. So what he's saying is, or is your selfishness, right? Are you selfish because I am good? Or in other translations, it says this, or are you envious because I'm generous? Holy cow. In other words, are you jealous when other people are blessed and you're not? And that rocked my world. That rocked my world. Because many times I am that way. When we refuse to see the generosity of the master, it's like we have this evil eye. When we refuse to see how God is blessing us, we have an evil eye. Does that make sense? And so what has he given us? Let me illustrate it this way. So, my kids are older now, but let's say when they were younger, I invited you over to my house for dinner. I have 3 kids. I have Mackenzie, who's my oldest, Cooper, who's my middle boy, and Madison. She's my youngest. And when they were, let's say when my son was around 10, he's a crazy kid. Gosh, I'm just thinking about him right now. He's nuts. Do you have crazy boys, right? Anyway, if you came over to my house and we had dinner together, so we had a big barbecue, and then after barbecue you always have some kind of dessert. And I said, hey guys, we're gonna have some dessert together. And I go into the freezer and I pull out Thrifty ice cream, because Thrifty ice cream's the best, right? Double chocolate malted crunch. Anybody love that stuff? It's the most amazing. Yeah, I get it Rite Aid. It's the best. If you haven't had it, go after the service today, go and buy it, because it is so good, and eat the whole thing in one sitting. Anyway, no, that's gluttony. Don't do that. But imagine I invite you over, and I said, hey, it's time for dessert, and I've got the kids. I'm saying, hey, I'm going to serve the kids first, and then I'll serve us. And I put out 3 bowls of ice cream, and I start scooping, right, ice cream in these bowls. And so here's Mackenzie's bowl, and I scoop her bowl of ice cream, and here's Cooper's bowl, and here's Madison's bowl, and I hand them their ice cream. What's the first thing they do? Yeah. Hey, wait a minute. Why did Madison get more than me? Hey, wait a minute. Why did Cooper get more than me? And they're not looking at the blessing before them that they've been given. They're looking outside that blessing at what somebody else got and saying that's not fair. That's the same thing that's happening here. That's not fair. So what's in your bowl, right? What has God given you? What is in your bowl? What is your life? What has God surrounded you with and blessed you with? And let me tell you, our bowls, guys, here in America are incredible. Because if you drove here this morning and you had running water, then you're ahead of 95% of the world. Because the rest of the world, they don't own a car, they don't have running water, they don't have clean water. But we do. And so what's in your bowl? What is it? And so the problem wasn't wasn't what was in front of him. The problem is when when the kids look at something else and not what has been provided for them. What has been provided for them? They moved from an apartment to a house. They'd been saving their money and years and years and years, and they finally raised enough money for a down payment, and they bought their little 950 square foot house. And man, it needed a lot of work. I mean, the carpet was dilapidated. The bathrooms were horrendous. But man, they had worked hard, and they felt like God had blessed them to finally get a down payment. They finally were able to buy the house, and they were super excited about that. And so they moved in, and the first night before they stayed at their house, they got a phone call from a friend, a long-lost friend from college. And that friend invited them over for dinner that night, saying, "Hey, I heard you guys moved into town, and I would love to invite you over to dinner." And so they said, "Oh, absolutely, we're kind of moving in, but we'd love to hang out with you." And so they got the address and hung up the phone, and they said, "Hey, tonight we're going to go to dinner." They took their little kids together and said, "We're going to go to dinner to this other family's house, and it's going to be a really good thing. We all went to college together and studied the same thing." And so they type in the address in their little GPS, and they realize, wow, that's on the other side of the tracks. That's on the nice side of town. And they get in their little old minivan, and they kind of drive over the railroad tracks into the nicer side of town, and they find the house, and they look, and they go, "No, this couldn't be." And it's this beautiful brick home. It's got this brick driveway that goes up, and they steer in, and they park, and they look, and there's a huge RV in the corner and a boat over on the side. You get the picture. They get out of the car, and they're just like, "Wow, what did we do wrong?" And they walk into the house, and the door's open, and they look in the backyard, and there's that swimming pool with a huge rock slide in it, and all these just incredible. The kids are out laughing, jumping on trampolines, and there's this huge opening that's as big as their home, just the foyer of the house. You know how the story goes. That night after dinner, they get in their little old minivan, strap their kids down in their dirty old car seats, turn around, go back to the other side of town, pull up to the little house that they just bought, and somehow deep down feel that God had ripped them off. Somehow feel that wasn't enough. When they looked outside of their bowl of what God blessed them with and looked at what somebody else had, they lost focus. What's in your bowl? What's in your bowl? We see that happen all the time. And again, the problem wasn't with what they had. The problem was when they took their eyes off of what they had and looked at what somebody else had. We do this all the time in all different ways. In all different ways. Our blessings become a curse. So in the Bible, over and over and over again, and we're going to go through some scriptures in just a second here, God describes his people as being servants. And really, as servants, they really have no rights. They don't own anything. And everything they have is being provided for them, for the use, for them to live, but for the use of the master. I mean, that really is scripture at the core of saying, hey, we are so blessed and honored to be able to follow after God, to surrender our lives to follow the King of Kings. Not that he doesn't love us, he obviously loves it, but you get the idea that he owns everything and he lets us use those things. So no matter if you live in a shack or you live in a mansion, or you live in between, or you have no talents, or you have a little bit of talents, you have many talents, doesn't matter where you are, all of those things have been given to us by God. And when we look at our own lives, and not in someone else's bowl, wow, we realize what we've really been blessed with. So again, these talents, these gifts, everything we had, we own nothing. It all belongs to the master as he sees fit. So look at this with me. Turn to the left to Leviticus chapter 20, what is it? 25. So we're looking at some Old Testament laws, really exciting. Read Leviticus, it's great reading. Just really interesting stuff. But you know what, there's interesting laws and things that, all of a sudden they'll just pop in and you go, what are these here for? But they're more, so when we read this, we can understand a little more in depth of kind of the mindset of biblical people. Okay, listen to what it says in Leviticus chapter 25, verse 24. It says this, the land shall not be sold permanently. Okay, remember, this is when the Exodus, and then you're having people going to a new land that God is providing for them a place, right? They're escaping tyranny, they're escaping slavery to something that God's providing for them, okay? Blessing them. And saying, I've heard your cries, it's time, okay? But here's some laws. And you need to understand this. So when you go and you get the land, listen closely. He says this, so the land shall not be sold permanently, for the land is mine. So God's saying, look guys, hey, I'm going to provide you with these things, but you have to know at the core, they're mine. You get it? Everything you have, the land where you're going to settle, it's mine. It's mine. The land is mine, for you are strangers and sojourners with me. And in all the land of your possession, you shall grant redemption of the land, which is kind of redemption laws, but we won't get into that. But again, the whole idea, the biblical mindset of a Hebrew is nothing that I have is mine. It's provided by God. Like he gave it to us, okay? Now, just scoot over to Deuteronomy chapter 6 to the right just a little bit. Another exciting book. It really is. I'm not. Because you have to think, these guys they haven't owned anything. They've been slaves for how many generations? And all of a sudden they're being released to be free when they've been in bondage. And so God has to set up things in place so that they understand, right? So that they understand the core of the gifts that God's about to give them. So in Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 10, listen to what it says. It says, so it shall be when the Lord your God brings you into the land of which he swore to your fathers, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Listen to this. To give you large and beautiful homes, or beautiful cities which you did not build, houses full of good things which you did not fill, hewn out wells which you did not dig, vineyards and olive trees which you did not plant, when you have eaten and are full. Okay, now just stop right there. It says, guys, I want you to remember, because you haven't experienced life like this in generations. Probably any of them alive at the time had not experienced these things. He says, I'm about to give you some of the greatest gifts you've ever had. I'm going to give you home. I'm going to give you food. I'm going to give you great things that you're not even going to have to work for. And then he says this, verse 12, he says, then beware. Do you catch that? Why would he say beware? He says, then beware, lest you forget the Lord who brought you out of the land of Egypt from the house of bondage. What he's saying is this, and I don't think it's true, right? That sometimes we forget where our stuff comes from. We forget where our gifts and talents come from. We forget who provides it for us. No, we forget all the time. He says, beware, watch out. Watch out that you don't forget the blessing. Watch out that you don't forget what's in your bowl. Watch out that you don't forget what I've provided for you. Watch out, because when you get comfortable, you lose sight of what's important. And I'll be the first to tell you, I'm comfortable. And I lose sight of what's important. And I forget that the things I have right in front of me, the things that I have in my bowl, are the hugest blessing I can have. And sometimes I'm looking at other people's bowls and saying, man, I wish I had that. Oh, I wish I had that. Oh, I wish I had that. And the Bible says, beware. Beware. Don't forget. Scoot over to Deuteronomy chapter 19 to the right just a little bit further. this is a very interesting part of Scripture. It's like set in a really weird place. And if you read it, you'd probably go, why is this here and what does this even mean? So let me explain it to you. So look at Deuteronomy chapter 19, verse 14. So he's talking about in chapter 19, the city's a refuge. So if you murder someone, there's these places you can go to hide out and be protected. And then in the midst of that, in verse 14, he talks about something else. And it says this, it says, you shall not remove your neighbor's landmark, which the men of old have set in your inheritance, which you will inherit in the land that the Lord your God is giving you to possess. So this is interesting. So what picture it like this. They're going to a new land, and in that land, back then they didn't have like GPS coordinates for, property lines. How do you tell whose land is who, right? How do you do that back in the day when, there isn't anything permanent? And so what they had were called boundary stones. And those boundary stones were sectioned off, and so that boundary stone would be set in place by the men of old, right? And that stayed there, and that would show you your property boundaries, okay? And it's kind of interesting. So each family was to receive what kind of a garden or a piece of land. They called it the gan. It was kind of an interesting thing. And so when they went into the new land, it would say, hey, these are your boundaries, and this is where you'll live between these two boundary stones, which is kind of a cool thing. Now, what we know happened in history, so let's say you show up early before your neighbor. Because, none of us would do that, but they did this back then. They would move the boundary stones. Because, there's no record of it. The boundary stone's there, and the neighbor's not there yet, so they're not going to know. And so some people were showing up early. Now picture this. And they would take the boundary stone and go, you know what, I need probably, that creek over there, that looks pretty good. I think I'm going to move my boundary stone a little further so I can have the creek in my piece of property. Again, total sinners, evil people. We wouldn't do that. So they would move the boundary stones. What are they doing? Now think about this. God has blessed them with this piece of land already. If I move the boundary stone, what am I saying to God? What am I saying? I'm saying what you provided for me is not enough. I need more. I'm looking over the fence saying, I like my neighbor's yard better than mine. And so I'm going to move that boundary stone. I'm going to move it over, and so what happens if I move the boundary stone? Two things. Number one, and this should come up on the screen here, is I end up turning my back on what I've been given. Now I want you to think about this for a minute. If I move the boundary stone, I'm turning my back on what God's provided for me. I'm turning my back on Him to get something I'm not supposed to have. Okay? So I turn my back on God. That's number one. Number two is this. I end up leaving my place for someone else's. I'm looking in someone else's bowl. I'm looking in someone else's, what someone else has, and I want it so bad that I end up leaving what I have to take what somebody else has been given. Now, I've worked with marriage ministry for years. And guys, I'm not going to be, adultery happens, unfortunately. And what adultery is a marriage and a couple, and someone in that couple says, I don't like what I have anymore, and they look at the boundaries and they push them and they say, I want what somebody else has. And they move the boundaries, and when they do that, yes, it's a terrible horror. They're turning their back on God. They're turning their back on what God's provided for them. They're turning their back on seeing the blessing that's in front of them, thinking that what's over that fence is better than what they have. When I turn my back on what I've been given, I leave my place for someone else, for someone else's. So you could say it like this, maybe, man, I wish I had their money. That would make me happy. Man, I wish I had their kids. Because you know what? My kids, man, I wish maybe I had their job. It's my job. I'm miserable every day. Man, I wish I had, if you want to get a little more, I had her hair. Not me, I don't wish I had her hair, but you know what I mean? Girls, ladies. I wish I had her husband, because mine isn't as caring and kind. I wish I had his talents. I wish I had more than I do. And we push those boundaries and we turn our back on what we've been given and we look in other people's bowls. I wish I had her personality. I wish I had, the list can go on. You see it? And in all the while, we forget what's right there in front of us. What's right there? Marriage counseling was helping a little bit for him, but there is still something missing. And even after years of marriage counseling, he decided that he was going to leave her for someone else, someone younger, someone more fun. And so he did. And his life's still miserable. These are stories that I've come across. They made great financial decisions and honored God all along the way. And then the market crashed and they lost everything. All the savings, all that they had. And so instead of having integrity in their finances, they started cheating here and there and got themselves in financial trouble again. She's been waiting so long for the right guy. She's been waiting for that Christian guy, but that Christian guy isn't there yet. And she was hoping he would be there, but the right guy showed up the wrong guy at the right time, I guess. And when he showed up, he cared for her and he loved her, but he wasn't a Christian and he didn't follow Christ, and she fell in love. And they got married, and the marriage was miserable. Didn't go to church anymore. Made a decision to follow this man other than Jesus. They wanted the best college for their kids, and they saved, and the kids didn't get good grades, but their best friend's kids got great grades and got scholarships. So they had to take out all kinds of student loans just so their kids could go to college. Most sin, think about this, you may disagree, but I believe this, most sin can be traced back to thinking that God hasn't been good to us. Most sin can be traced back thinking, I deserve this and I didn't get it, and therefore I'm going to do something about it. I used to work at a grocery store called Alpha Beta. Does anybody remember that grocery store? Yes, Alpha Beta. It was awesome. I was a courtesy clerk 1. I wore a brown vest, quite handsome, I must say, in my high school days. Don't laugh. No. I worked really, really hard because my goal was to be a checker. I don't know what they call them now. Do they still call them checkers? The people who check out your groceries. And back then it was all unionized, so checkers made like $20 an hour. And so the day I got hired, I remember I said my goal was to be a checker, and I'm going to do everything I can to be a checker. And I worked extra hard. Anytime there was a cleanup, I was the guy to do it. I jumped, I ran, I memorized all the produce codes. I memorized everything I could. And I remember going to my boss, when am I going to be a checker? I want to be a checker. And all the checkers who had been there for like 20 years because it was great pay at the time. They had great benefits. But finally, there was one checker that was retiring, and I said, that's my spot. I'm going in. I'm going to be a checker. And so I went to the manager and I said, look, I have worked so hard. He's like, yeah, you have. And so he goes, okay, we're going to look at you and we're going to see if you're the right guy. And so I, doubled up my game, took extra hours, worked for people, did whatever I could. Well, about halfway into that process, we hired a brand new courtesy clerk who happened to be the nephew of the assistant manager. You know where this story's going. When that checker position opened, I was the key in, I thought. I had proven myself. I had worked so hard. One day I walked into work, and who do I see checking was that brand new guy. Didn't even know the produce codes. I wanted to slap him so hard. Just being honest. I was so angry. About an hour later, we had a grocery load coming in. And so they say, hey, Bill, this grocery load coming in, can you pull it out off the truck? I'm like, yeah. So I go back, and I'm just back there. I'm steaming, right? I deserve that job. That job's mine. I need that job. I can't believe that guy got that job. And I'm pulling all the groceries off the truck, and, I'm mumbling to myself and, just brewing and stewing. And I remember, you know what? I'm so mad. I'm gonna steal. I'm going to steal something. And I looked over, and I saw this case of tuna. And I said, this tuna's mine. And I hate tuna. I don't even like tuna. I hate it. And I grabbed the case of tuna. I'm like, yes. And I took it, and I hit it, and I'm like, okay. And so I'm looking around, and I said, this will make me feel, I'm going to steal this tuna. And I went down, and I went in the back of where the truck was by the dock, and I hid it kind of behind some boxes. And I said, after work, I'm going to come pick up this case of tuna, and I'll show them, just in my weird, I don't know, you probably think I'm really weird now. But that's my mentality. And I remember after work, I went over and I grabbed, this tuna's mine. I earned this tuna. They owe me this tuna. And I put it in my car, drove away. When you believe you're ripped off, right? When you believe you're ripped off, you can justify anything. You can justify anything. When I believe I've been ripped off by God, I can justify my sin. Well, God, I did that because you didn't provide. Well, God, I did that because of this. Oh, God, I did that because, what about them and them and them? And God's like, oh, man. Now, just so you know, the tuna story, years later, I went back and repaid for the tuna, and the manager, you should have just seen the look on the manager's face when that, hey, I stole the case of tuna. He's like, who are you? Like, I don't even, anyway, it was a funny story. So I worked hard. I deserved the promotion, but I didn't. And so a heart that believes it has been ripped off by God may easily justify its actions. Man, we have entitlement, right? We believe life is not fair. I get it. Here's the thing, God gets it too. God gets it too. So what are the consequences if I inwardly suspect that God has ripped me off? What are some of the things that go on in my life if I suspect that God has ripped me off? So if I inwardly suspect these things, here, I just wrote down 5 of them. Number 1 is this: I miss out on seeing the good all around me. So when a blessing does happen, I miss it because I'm focused on another bowl, or I'm focused looking outside the walls of my boundaries. And when something good does happen, I can't I'm not even aware. And so I'm miserable all the time. So if you find yourself miserable and you find yourself in that place, and I don't know, I don't know if there's anyone here maybe that's why. Maybe it's because you feel ripped off. Maybe it's because you feel that you deserve more. Maybe you feel entitled. Maybe it's, God didn't give you what you thought you deserved. But that's only going to hurt you. God knows what you need better than you do. So number 1, I miss out on seeing the good all around me. Number 2, I will not experience joy for others when they are blessed. Man. I'll just tell you one recently that happened to us, being transparent here. Nothing we wanted more than to take our daughter to go to New York for her graduation. She's graduating this year. And we've just had some life things happen that we're not going to be able to do that. And it's just been, it's just not going to happen. Well, just the other day, my wife's right here, Mackenzie, who our daughter, she says, hey, she goes, man, this is so cool. And Mackenzie's awesome because she doesn't see it. And she goes, yeah, one of her friends in Arizona said her parents just on a whim bought her tickets for graduation to go to New York. And she's like, oh, my friend Ashley, she's going to get to go to New York and she's going to get to see all the things I want to see. And I was mad. I was so mad. And I don't know why. It's not like me to get mad like that. But for some reason, this whole thing, I'm like, instead of being excited for her and her family, I was like, well, I hope it snows and they can't go, or I hope the plane, breaks down. Or in my head, I'm thinking all this stuff. Why? Why am I thinking that? Why am I doing that? Because I want to take my daughter and I can't. So I'm a big whiner. I'm looking over and I'm looking in their bowls. I'm not looking in my own, and I'm angry because I'm not getting what I think I deserve, and somebody else is, and I can't rejoice. So when somebody gets a new house or a new job, or somebody gets something awesome that you wanted, and you're looking back and you're like, oh yeah, that's great. I hate you. Oh yeah, someone gets the promotion that you didn't get. That's where the rubber meets the road. But here's the thing, if you live in your place, you can rejoice because you know what God has for you. And it doesn't matter what goes on around here because you're focused on your garden, you're focused on your bowl and not someone else's. So I miss out on seeing the good all around me. I will not experience joy for others when they are blessed. Number 3, I may go into financial debt trying to attain what I shouldn't have. Oh, this is the classic. Well, we want to buy the 3,000 square foot house instead of the 2,500 square foot house. But we can't really afford it. God's provided for the 2,500 square foot house, but you know what? If you work 3 jobs, we can do it. We do this all the time. And so we think, oh, okay, I'm going to work these extra jobs. I'm going to do, and then all of a sudden you're like, my family's falling apart. Yeah, because you're never home. And we try to attain things and we go into debt financially and relationally because we try and do things that God hasn't provided us with. Wow. Wow. Number 4, I refuse to trust that God has what is best for me. And this is what happens after years and years and years of this. You come to a place where you're just like, you know what? I know God's God, but I believe better than him. And you get so bitter and so angry. And you get to this place where you're like, you know what, God, I know what you have for me, but I know what's better for me. I know what's better for me. And we begin to make choices and we begin to lose trust in him. And we don't lean on him. And so when a tough decision comes, instead of following God, we follow our feelings. Instead of following Scripture, we follow our thoughts. Or Dr. Phil, I don't know. We follow things that we shouldn't. We follow things that we shouldn't. And number 5, and this is probably the worst offense that could happen, is I withhold my worship. I withhold my worship. Because if I don't believe that God's been good to me, how can I worship? And worship is a response to thankfulness and gratefulness in our life of all that he's done. And if I don't truly believe that he's done anything and I'm not grateful and thankful for him, then I'm going to withhold the very thing that he wants from me, the worship, to say that you are more important than I am. So let me leave you with this. How do you take a message and practically apply this to your life? Like, Bill, what are you telling me to do here? How do you do this? How do you walk away and take this with you? Let me just give you some thoughts. God has given you this place to live in. I don't know what that is. Only you know. When you find yourself looking over the fence or looking in other people's bowls, stop it. Just stop it. And refocus and say, God, what is it you have for me? And you'll know when those things pop up in your head, right? You already know right now. I don't need to, you know. But imagine this. Imagine if every single person in here decided to live this way and to say, you know what? I am going to be grateful and thankful for for this family that I have, for this job that I have, for this place in life that we are, for this financial situation, for this, even this disease if it's in our life, for all of these horrible things and great things and whatever they are, everything that's in these boundaries, I'm going to be grateful and thankful for. And I'm going to live in that. Imagine the difference that's going to make in your life. Imagine the difference that's going to make in this church, and imagine the difference that's going to make in your neighborhoods when people see that you're not keeping up with the Joneses and that you're more happy than they are when they keep buying the stuff that they don't need and being the person that they shouldn't. That's who we are when we lean on Jesus. We're His. He's the master. So go. Live with what's in your bowl. Don't look over the fence. Don't move the boundary stones. And I guarantee you your life will be transformed.